Hey, you lovely lot, and welcome back to Crime Analyst and Crime Analyst YouTube. And thank you so much for being here and going the distance with Ellen Greenberg's disturbing case and what I'm calling a hidden homicide. You know, the devil is in the detail, and you're going to hear so much more in this episode as Sarah Cailean and I share our expert analysis and insights. Also, if you want to hear my analysis and breakdown of the 911 call made by Samuel Goldberg, join the Crime Analyst squad over on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/crime analyst. I've shared this interview with statement analyst Paul Malliadet, where we break down that 911 call word by word and line by line. Also, there are 33 other posts about Ellen Greenberg's case waiting for you in the Crime Analyst squad, along with my analysis and insight and my 2 cents on many other cases, including Sean Diddy Combs, Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Andrew, who's no longer a prince. That took some time. Virginia Giuffre. And I also recently shared, as October's exclusive episode for the Crime Analyst Squad, my presentation and masterclass, Profiling Behavior and the Early Warning Signs and High Risk Factors of Coercive Controllers and Stalkers. This really is life-saving and life-changing information, and it's available for you to watch the presentation in the Crime Analyst squad. Just go to patreon.com/crime analyst, go over there after you've watched this video, and you can check out all the other videos and content there. And also, I just want to say a huge thank you to you for being here, for watching my videos. It really does mean the world to me. Thank you for those who take the time to leave comments, and your supportive messages mean the world to me. And thank you for your super thanks as well. Every donation really makes a big difference. So thank you so much for that. And don't forget to subscribe. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos. Okay, with all that having been said, let's dive into this illuminating discussion with Sarah Cailean. I think also, from my perspective, the pain and pills issue, we do see women who, when they end their lives, it tends to be through pills. And what was interesting in Dr. Wayne Ross's report was, and you saw it in the docuseries, when you went into the apartment, Nancy showed on screen what was on the surface. But Dr. Wayne Ross, and I mean in terms of the work surface, there was the fruit, the overturned knife block, but there were some pills as well. And I think it's interesting that if, with the web searches that we hear about in part 3, searches about painless suicide, when you put these things together, there are problems for me, because if there are pills in there, why would she not just take the pills, take an easy way out, rather than go through this whole horrifically painful process of stabbing herself in this way in actually a very short time frame? There's an under pressure time frame. Sam saying he left the apartment, she was fine, and then by the time he comes back, 30 minutes later, it takes him some time to get through that door, but then she's, apparently stabbed herself. And that to me just doesn't seem congruent either. I wonder if that jumped out at you, or whether there were other things that really did jump out at you that were very significant throughout any stage of the process you were filming or researching and analyzing the case.
Well, I would say, and I know you referenced this when you and Nancy spoke about it, but for me, the knife block was huge, because there's no struggle, there's no struggle. Yeah, there is. That's a struggle right there.
Yeah.
And this again is, I don't know that I have anything to back this up other than, having spoken with women who've gone through, like, she filled up before she left school or after she left school in the middle of a blizzard. Harrisburg is about 2 hours west of Philadelphia without a storm. She's going to drive into a blizzard. She's going to be in the car for a while. And what I see is that she was set to leave in a matter of minutes when the fight actually happened. I think the berries, everything that was getting prepped, that was snacks for the car. The car was full. She had the boots on. She was going to grab the stuff in the bathroom and go. And so, like, all of that there, and again, if she's supposedly been home at that point for 3 hours or 4 hours, why does she have the boots on? We do, Nancy talked about this, where it's like, nah, a lot of us who are tiny, we've got indoor shoes and outdoor shoes, and those were her outdoor shoes, and like nothing else in that house fits that. And again, I guess you could maybe write that off, but not just that she was dressed and ready to go. She had a coat, a scarf, her toiletries bag. That's another thing that I feel like the men dismiss so easily. And it's like, no, we all know, like, there's no way that stuff is just sitting on the counter in a house that is otherwise this pristine. She's leaving.
I'm nodding. I mean, for those who can't see that, because, women in toiletries and cosmetics, that's a very important.
I have backup. I have traveled cosmetics. I have traveled toiletries because I also travel a lot. Like you have, yeah, you're not just, that stuff's not just living on the counter in a travel bag.
Yeah, and the outdoor shoes or the outdoor rugs, that was new information to me as well. That, I did hear about the gas tank, and some people might say, well, the storm was coming in and therefore you want to be prepared. But it's when you put all these things together, isn't it? It's not just one thing on its own. It's looking at that whole movie and the way it plays out and thinking about a woman's mindset and the fact that she's prepared to leave in a storm. Well, that tells me that there's something pretty serious going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too.
Everybody else is
Yeah,
hunkering
otherwise,
down, right? That's
right. Yeah, and the thing about the gas, like, yeah, I guess there are reasons you might, but she lives in an apartment building in the 5th largest city in America. She's likely not going to lose power or services. She's not going to need to go if it's about hunkering down, right, to have the gas. There's nowhere to go. There's stores all over the place. They're gonna be open as soon as the snow stops. Like, there's not a need the way there would be if you lived out in the country, like, "Oh, let me fuel up just in case." That just was not a necessity there. She filled up because she was driving somewhere.
yeah, I believe so. And I think, one of the things, and I shared it with Nancy, but what struck me was when you actually opened the apartment door, that you're pretty much in the kitchen. I mean, it's actually quite a small area,
In
isn't
the
it?
kitchen, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I didn't
Very
understand.
small little galley kitchen. Yeah.
What more can you say about that? I mean, you've stood there, and therefore, when I heard Sam's 911, which I'd listened to many, many times, I was trained at the FBI looking at, words that point to we need to ask more questions about this, veracity, deception, and so on. It's not an exact science. You need to understand baseline, and there's a lot more to it. But the fact that he said that I've just walked in, I'm actually going to quote from the
Yeah.
911 call because I think it is interesting, even right at the start. He said, I just walked into my apartment. My fiance's on the floor with blood everywhere. And the casualness of this just walking in, when what his second story is, bearing in mind that this is really the first statement to the police, but what the next story is was that he was banging down the door trying to get in, and his neighbor.
For half an hour or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing casual about that, and the text messages and so forth. So when I just walked in, my fiance's on the floor with blood everywhere. Well, I mean, horrific and traumatic and so on. So we have to account for trauma. But human nature is such that if we see blood everywhere, we want to make sense of it, of what the hell's gone on here. And I find it very hard to believe that over 2 minutes in, he's still not able to say where that blood's coming from or what's going on for Ellen. And therefore, I thought this was quite a big apartment, that he was stood at the door and he probably couldn't see her fully. Therefore, he couldn't see this really quite big knife that's sticking out her chest. That when I saw the crime scene photos, I was like, why didn't he see that? That doesn't make sense to me why he didn't immediately see that knife, because the brain and the eyes immediately search out for the cause. He didn't mention it.
No, and I think honestly, all of everything you're saying, I definitely agree with, and I took a lot of issue where the phone call certainly, and I always caveat the same thing, right? Everybody responds to trauma differently. Everybody responds to a crisis differently, and so I always want to be careful about like, oh, they did cry or they didn't cry, that kind of stuff. I'm willing to dismiss, but yeah, the everything about the call, if you go through it line by line, feels as though it was like, this is the thing that I'm supposed to say right now. But of all of it, the thing that stood out to me was in the call as she's saying, you need to try and render aid, essentially. You need to go find out where the blood's coming from, check on her. Does she have a pulse and this and that and everything? All the, the instructions that the dispatcher is giving him, which is standard. He's saying, he's expressing to her that he is trying to figure out what's going on, that he's going to unzip the jacket and then, oh my God, I see this knife now. Let's even, again, does write off the fact that he didn't see the knife from 6 feet away where he was standing. Okay, fine. Here's the problem. In the crime scene photos, there is sort of a pool of blood around her, and it has bled for a little bit and then stopped, as blood does. It's like the viscosity, it starts. And I'm not a pathologist, I'm not a criminalist, but I've been on crime scenes, and you can see that the blood moves to a certain point and then it stops and it makes kind of like a shape. There is no disruption to that shape at all. Nobody tried to touch her. Nobody unzipped that jacket. Nobody stepped in that blood. And so what he's saying on the phone, again, does not match what we know. Like, you can look at, and I guarantee, like, you can't touch the body without disrupting the blood that's all around the body, and even disrupting the blood on the body. None of that is touched. And so as he's saying to the dispatcher, oh, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that. And all I can see in that movie in my mind is him just standing at the door saying all these things until he gets to say, oh my God, there's a knife sticking out of her heart. That's another thing that jumped at me, is he didn't say her chest, he said her heart, which is just, again, it's a small difference, but I don't know that it's the language most people would go with if they saw that knife.
Exactly. And I think, all of those points are just so relevant. The fact that the blood isn't disturbed, i.e. his body is not in it. Normally, I know from 911 calls, 999 calls, I've analyzed many of them, but the person rushes to that person because they want to see if they're still alive. And the whole point of the 911 or 999 is to get them medical help.
Yes.
Because you believe they're still alive. But the actions, the behavior, and the language aren't congruent to that. And we can say, oh, it's trauma, possibly, but I just don't buy it because of the language, that where he's saying, as you describe across time, 2 minutes go by, the 911 dispatcher is saying, you can't see where the blood's coming from. And Sam says, I think her head. I think she hit her head. I think, and then he keeps saying, the blood's everywhere. It's everywhere. The 911 dispatcher says, do you think she might have fallen? Yeah. So we've hit her head. We go from hit her head to fallen. Oh, she may have slipped. She may have slipped. There's blood on the table. And we go through a sequence of so many different possibilities.
Yeah.
Well,
don't forget, he says she may have fallen on the knife. Well, I don't mean to make light of it, but
that's the next bit where she says, oh my God, she stabbed herself. She fell on a knife. Oh no, her knife's sticking out. Now, I've never heard a personal pronoun for a knife, and that's curious to me. But the language is so curious, and the fact that when the docuseries, when you see the door opening and you see the proximity and how small a space this is, that's where this falls down for me. Because also you do tend to see someone cradling their loved one, comforting them, still talking to them as if they're still alive. Now, yes, somebody might have an aversion to blood, right? And he's not overly keen on doing CPR, but there's no real attempt to do any of that, which implies to me, and again, it's speculative, but when you compare it to many other 911, 999 calls, that he already knows the answer to these questions, and therefore the call is staged. And the staging also, for me, connects to the staging of the scene. But the banging on the door, the call, and the scene, the staging is congruent. And the only reason you stage is to point attention and direction elsewhere. And why would he need to do that if he genuinely has come home and this has happened? And the other thing, Nancy said, which I think all women share, maybe it is a woman thing, I don't know, but your first thought is that someone's attacked her. That would be my first thought. If I've left somebody and they're perfectly fine, I would worry someone came in. because there was no evidence of him searching the apartment. You know,
Yep.
it says to the dispatcher, there's no sign of an intruder or anyone coming in. Well, you don't hear him on the call searching or looking anywhere. It does sound like he's, not actually doing
Right
too
there at
much.
that door.
Yeah,
Yeah.
stood at that door, and you can see her and this knife. I mean, the knife handle is quite large. It's not that it could be hidden through various layers of clothing. I mean, that is a possibility, I guess, but from the crime scene photo, it doesn't look that way. So I definitely have questions about that.
Yeah. And you briefly touched on it too, but the last thing I would say in the as you're talking about it, the incongruity of the language is when the dispatcher says something about like, can I walk you through CPR essentially? And he says, I guess I have to.
Yeah.
That
Your love,
I mean, it's so cold. I
your
guess I
beloved,
have to. Yeah.
beloved is lying there. I mean, that's the desperation you normally have from people who want to save life. They want to do everything possible. And in fact, you're not consciously even thinking or processing, you're just doing. And you want that dispatcher. If you've never done CPR before, you hang off every word they're saying. I just don't get that sense in that call from, there's a level of urgency to get her help. And the other thing that struck me about um the docuseries, I mean, there are many things, and there's still the strangulation element I want to ask you about, but the fact that the fire department, they were first to attend, and whichever first responder went in, they said, you don't need an ambulance or a paramedic, you need a homicide detective. That to me speaks
Yeah. And
volumes.
and those are people who see these scenes.
No.
They see the medical side of this. They know what's going on. And again, yeah, he's the firefighter or the medic is not a pathologist either, but it seems pretty obvious to just about anybody in a way that that medic is kind of a proxy for all the rest of us that you would look at it and go, well, duh, you know, but like what this is. It's something actually just I don't know why I didn't think of this before, but um I have a case that actually was the subject of the second season of my podcast, and that was one in which the victim had been attacked. She had been stabbed in her home. Her husband and a friend were the ones who did find her, and everything you're describing about what you would have expected from Sam's 911 call, as you were saying, and I was like, yeah, I did. I heard all of that in Justin's exchange. And and I also, it just in interviewing him in the years since, he really it didn't seem to him that she had been stabbed. He also thought maybe she hit her head. She's got, blood sugar issues. Maybe she fell. And it's only like as it's all sort of washing over him that he starts to notice even that there's blood around her hair and everything. And it's just so much more I hate to say it, but natural sounding of a response as he's talking to the 911 operator as these things really are hitting him for the first time.
Yeah. And, you get a sense of calls, but of course you need to know baseline. Like, he is polite on the call, and I do think he probably is a polite, well-mannered person to some. I'm not sure about that necessarily follows through to all, but I don't know enough about him. So, I give a lot of grace on these things because you need
Yeah.
to know someone and their personality and their baseline and so forth. But there are certainly a lot of questions in that 911 call. And it's just another element of the case. It's not the whole thing. But Dr. Wayne Ross's report, did you read his report that raised 60 critical points related primarily to staging? Um, he specializes in forensics and neuropathology, and he's been involved with the case for 10 years. And
I must have at some point read it. Yeah, it's when you're talking about the 60 points of staging that feels familiar, but unfortunately I haven't re-examined it in the last 6 months to speak to it for you tonight, unfortunately. But
can I jog your memory on just a
yeah,
couple of things
please do.
that he said? Because he does document defensive wounds to the wrists and defensive wounds to the legs. And that was absent in the original autopsy. But again, it talks to the sign of disturbance of the knife block, doesn't it? And Look, I've heard this case talked about on numerous podcasts, and they always say there were no defensive wounds, she didn't fight back, and therefore, but that's not true. And I have to say, I do trust what's in Dr. Wayne Ross's report because it sounds incredibly thorough compared
Yeah.
to Dr. Osbourne's report. But those
Yes.
defensive wounds on the legs, he talks specifically about, because some people say, well, she could be clumsy. Nancy said, I'd never heard that from anybody, and I'm not going to speculate on why she has so many bruises on her body. But for me, it does point to there's defensive wounds in those moments of what happened to her, but there's also a lot more bruising at various stages of healing that are not from the January event. And I wondered what you made of that, just of, there were many, I think it was upwards of 50 different abrasions and bruises, which for me point much more to a history of abuse.
Yeah, well, I think the key in there is the different stages of healing, right? And that when, we use the term in law enforcement, the totality of the circumstances. When you look at that along with the changes in the behavior, the changes in clothing, the sort of withdrawing in, and you're seeing this pattern of like the bruises in various stages of healing is a phrase that we hear over and over and over with this case, but it's so important because I mean, I am somebody who's very clumsy, and I do often at this moment have bruises on my arm that I'm not 100% sure where they came from. But even and I mean, seriously, like, I fall down like it's my job. I do not have 50 different bruises on my body that that could be interpreted as anything other than, I mean, I don't have 50 bruises on my body, period, but even the ones that I have, I don't think would ever look like they came from a struggle. And I think to your point, the stuff on the legs, one of the things I tried to convey, when we were at the scene and I'm not sure how much of it made it off the cutting room floor or whatever, but the struggle happened in a very small place. It happened, as far as I'm concerned, in that corner of the kitchen right there next to the knife block. I think that's where the attack happened, that's where the struggle happened, and so the bruising, like everything else, is gonna be happening, I mean, the ones from that day, like on the legs that you said, is gonna be happening all right in that space, and so she probably is banging on the counter as she's being, turned around, and or, fighting with him. Defensive wounds don't necessarily mean you clawed somebody or, it can just be wounds that happened in the course of trying to defend yourself. And that's I do think we see that for that tight little corner that I believe the whole thing took place right there in that corner.
Yes, and it certainly looks like the evidence bears that out. There's also some of it, Dr. Wayne Ross talks about her hair. There's some of her hair on the
Yeah.
floor. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because if it were a suicide, why would her hair be there? I mean, if there's a struggle, you can understand it. She's putting her hands up and she's trying to get him off or get the knife off. And at the same time, you're pulling potentially bits of your hair out as well as it's frenzied and it's
Yeah.
very painful what's going on. So that
Yeah.
hair, for me, is another critical piece of evidence that points to the fact it's not suicide. He also talked about point 33 on his report is incapacitation by strangulation.
Yeah. That's the big one right there.
What did you make of that? Because, we know through the analysis and the research that strangulation increases the risk 7 times to femicide. And often, when I heard people talk about the turtlenecks and so on, I wondered what was going on underneath, because sometimes that's what women use to hide, longer sleeves and so on. But strangulation is really a form of control. And the incapacitation by strangulation was very interesting to me, particularly when you look at the 10 points that are predictors of stage suicide. Ellen, I don't know if you're aware of the 10, but Ellen's case actually ticks 9 of them. And the one I couldn't answer was strangulation. So that's why I also wanted to ask you what your thoughts were around that.
It's interesting that you said that about the stage suicide, because of course, when I showed up at the apartment, I had my copy of the crime classification manual, which talks, that Ambergis et al. Did at the BSU. But it talked about the stage suicide. And so that jumped out at me too, the different points on it. But I think once you have a good, even the original medical examiner, but then once you have people like over and over saying there's evidence of strangulation here, and strangulation is, if I'm not misremembering the numbers, the single biggest predictor that a domestic abuser will eventually murder. And so if we have a history of it, or of just even sort of, the obviously not fatal, but strangulation where there's bruising and stuff, this is this is indicative of somebody who, like you said, the control is the only thing that matters, and that is the most assured way of controlling somebody in that immediate moment. But for me, it's just the bigger flag that if there's a history of strangulation, he's going to kill somebody. Whether, I mean, if it, and I try and convey this to people I talk to in crowds and stuff, like if there's strangulation happening, if you can get out, you should get out, because he's going to kill somebody, you know?
100%. I mean, the biggest indicators are strangulation. We know it increases the risk sevenfold to femicide, and coercive control. So if you have the two together, but often strangulation is used to get that coercive control. You put like Gabby Petito, you put your hand over the mouth or nose or suffocate, or hands around the neck. It's a sign to a woman, and it is men who tend to do this to women. Coercive control, separation, and finality. The finality of her, that is it, it's over. That's where we see the most lethal things. And, that's why I was very curious about the strangulation, because the 10 predictors, she ticks every one of them, and they are predictors. The Bitten and Dayan study in particular, and I mentioned them after Nancy had jumped off the mic. I did an extra recording just going through them so that my listeners would be aware of them. The fact that I'll quickly go through them, and then I want to just return to strangulation and just ask your view on the history of whether there was a history, because Dr. Wayne Ross also he determined that across the layers of Ellen's neck there was hemorrhaging that indicated strangulation, and on her neck there were fingernails, and again fingernail marks, I should say, and it
Are
wasn't
defensive wounds.
yes.
Yeah.
And I wondered whether that had been known to you through any of the reports that you had read. But for me, that really stood out. And I guess it comes back to, Sarah, when you know what you're looking for, these things are really standout things, particularly when you're looking at behaviors, that whether they're present or whether they're not in a case like Ellen's.
I did not know about the fingernails. That's the first actually that I'm hearing about that. And what's interesting, that one almost immediately brings to mind the one that is sort of known as the Preppy murder here, at the New York, the 1986 case, where it was the same thing. It was a
Jennifer
strangulation.
Levin, was it?
Jennifer Levin, yeah, and she had the fingernail marks, her own fingernail marks on her face and on her neck, and that's what that is. The fingernails aren't probably from him; they're from her trying to pull him off. And so you saying that, I'm not sure that I needed much more convincing, but it certainly demonstrates that the physical violence may have. I always say, like, with this case, you don't necessarily have to have had physical violence up to that point for it to have exploded, in a fatal way that day. But to hear that Dr. Ross is, like, saying, like, yeah, in addition to the potential hemorrhaging that shows, a pattern of strangulation, the fingernail marks, boy, that's scary, because it means she could not breathe. She could not breathe.
Yeah, that was a really standout point. And obviously, with the hemorrhage under the skin, you can't age
Yeah.
them. So there's no way to say it's historical and it's healing, or whether it came from those moments. But for me, it really does stand out when you look at those 10 predictors. of stage suicide. And one is that the victim died suddenly or unexpectedly. 2 is that it was deemed a suicide. 3 is evidence of separation. And we heard much more, or I did, from Nancy's, the Ugg boots, the gas tank. When you join all these things, the toiletries, the engagement ring was off, all of these things, that whether there's prior domestic abuse or coercive control. The 5th is that the deceased found the person dead at home. 6 is that the deceased was found by the current or former partner. So they're the 6 that Bitton and Dayan came up with in 2019. They analysed murder scenes that had been staged and concealed femicides. And then the Alliance for Hope International came up with another 4 from being involved with domestic abuse related deaths that were suspicious. And they've come up with 7, which is strangulation. 8 is partner or ex-partner had control of the crime scene before law enforcement arrived. 9 is that the partner or ex-partner was the last to see the victim alive. And 10 is that the body had been moved or the scene or evidence altered in some way. And as you know, it could just be one thing, like the towel in her hand, the left hand, the clean white towel, when we know Ellen was right-handed. And what's that towel doing? It could just be one element. It doesn't need to be that they've spent, hours at the scene manipulating it. But that
Well, the
strangulation.
blood drips too that had kind of, again, congealed, coagulated on her face in a different position. So she had at some point, her head had been moved as well. Yeah.
Yes, and why move? I mean, yes, you might say, well, because of the 911, the dispatcher said for him to,
But he didn't. He didn't.
but he didn't.
Yeah.
So, those are the questions. So ticking the strangulation box takes us to 10, where Casey Gwynn, who is the president and an attorney, has worked lots of domestic violence related cases and been involved in a lot of strangulation cases. He says that if those 10 are present, it's always a homicide.
Yeah.
And I think, for me, I never deal in absolutes. I'm sure you're the same. I always say almost always. But the challenge is when you add all of these things together, it's not just one thing on its own. It's the totality of the circumstances that just is so disturbing with this case. And the strangulation part, Dr. Ross says strangulation to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, which even that is a strong statement from
Yeah.
a medical examiner, isn't it?
Yeah. 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 A medical certainty is pretty powerful language.
It is. And then his last point, I mean, there are 60 points within the report, but just for those who are listening to us talk, I mean, at 55, he states, Dr. Emery and I agree that within a reasonable degree of medical certainty, Ellen sustained a 1.1 centimeter cut after she was already dead. The cut was not self-inflicted. So when we see the visuals, the 10, there's 2 of them in particular. One, that is within her spinal cord. And then, of course, you've got the 10 on the front. I think most medical professionals would say the 10 behind onto the neck and to the back of the head. I mean, that's atypical. That's something that we just do not see. And even being, is it even possible to
No, it's
lose?
not. Yeah. Not there, at least a couple of the spots, because it would have involved her wrist turning in a way that human wrists don't turn. Um, and again, the flip side of that is that the pattern looks very much like it's like this. It's what we see in stabbing death. It's, through a loss of control like that.
Yeah, and
I mean,
Dr.
just
Wayne Ross,
patterns looks.
like
Yeah.
right hand, left hand, she has been hit with right hand and left hand. Why would she do that? Of use her right hand and then carry on stabbing with the left hand and then the right hand? It doesn't make sense. So even just that on a basic level. Let me ask you this. I've kept you on for a very long time, but what's the most compelling or significant piece of evidence or information that you discovered in Ellen's case that stands out to you?
I think the thing, and this, I don't, I will take full ownership of this. This is not, I'm not speaking for the documentary. I'm not speaking for Nancy. I'm not speaking for Llewellyn or ABC or any of the other people who may well find themselves on the other side of a lawsuit from Sam. But to me, you can almost ignore all of the rest of it by looking at the physics, and I am not good with physics, with geometry, like, this is not my strong suit, but the way the locking mechanism is, for if the door was kicked in, the only way the locking mechanism doesn't stay connected is if one side, it's screwed into the door frame and it's screwed into the door, right? And then the latch folds over. Everybody's been to a hotel. If the door is kicked in, one side or the other has to be removed in order for the door to come open. Doesn't matter which side, but neither side is removed.
Yes.
Both of them are fully intact. There's no indication that, and that is like that from the original crime scene photos. They relatched it, but you can see the screws in the walls. That door was never kicked in, and you can, like, all the rest of it becomes moot in a way if he's lying about that, you know? And I think, you know, I think we narrowed down pretty well the time exactly of when, you know, what minutes, you know, this may have happened, and, you know, everything like that. But all of that, again, just goes out the window because he didn't kick that door in. Like, it's physically impossible. And I just have never understood why that wasn't the end of the accepting of suicide.
And I'm nodding very hard because the latch for me is also a smoking gun. And it doesn't tally with I just walked into my apartment. There's no I smashed the door down to get to my fiancé. I couldn't get in. He doesn't say that right at the top. It's a casual I just walked into my apartment. There was no smashing the door down. And I agree with you. The metal, it's metal screws. It would have pulled off the wood hammering down the side of the door, and you would see a disturbance. In fact, this is what the first point that Dr. Wayne Ross makes. The lock is disturbed but not broken from
Yeah,
the inside.
it's not broken. And I think, you know, when you say, and this we could do this all day, those of us who have kind of like spent a lot of time, you know, analyzing these minds and whatnot. But the the way that it's like he has to kind of keep a story straight when he's saying like, "Oh, I just walked in," and then at some point he has to remember, "Wait, I'm supposed to have kicked the door in," so then that has to get introduced. And the fact is, it's very difficult to keep a lie straight. It is never difficult to keep the truth straight.
100%. You have to remember the web of lies, but the truth is just as it happened.
Just as it happened. Yeah.
But the challenge for us as investigators, analysts, and so forth, if someone's never interviewed, interrogated, and we don't get a first account at the scene, then that's highly problematic, isn't it? But that timeline is also key. And I would love, the other part is the concierge, Philip Hanton, who you had in the docuseries, who says, I did not go in the elevator with Sam. I did not bash that door down. And of course, a lot has been hung on the fact that Sam discovered her with someone else. Well, when the videos finally, Joe Pedraza got the videos, the surveillance videos that showed Sam going into the elevator and that he didn't have someone with him. So again, timelining them, I would have loved to have seen Ellen come home, see the footage of that, Sam then come home, and just what the time is of that, and then compared to the phone calls that were made, because we know Sam called his cousin, uncle, and they were actually, at least his cousin was at the scene when the police arrived. So how did they
Yep.
get there?
Yeah.
Through telepathy, right? We know that there's digital evidence. So there's a lot that
Well,
you, as an
that is like Oscar
investigator,
Pistorius too. Oscar Pistorius also called other people before calling, you know, for medical services. So
yes, and we've seen that happen in numerous cases where they've turned out to be the person who isn't just a person of interest, but is the suspect. I mean, a time when your life is falling apart, the last thing you do is start to call your mates or other people in to create even more of a chaotic situation and scene. You just want to listen to law enforcement. That's the norm. You want to hang off every word they're saying. So yes, I think there's a lot more here with Ellen's case. I'm glad that it's getting the national spotlight. I'm glad that the judge ruled that there has to be a decision on the re-examination
yeah,
of the case by October the 14th, is it? So
yeah,
not
I
that
think
far
so.
off.
No,
And I thank you for talking with me, for playing the role that you did of raising questions that are things that we can use our experience and ask questions so that we can test things out and see whether it fits, works, whether it's a possibility or what is the probability. And with cold cases, we have to do that. I just wish with Ellen's case and with her family, they didn't have to fight so hard for the basics to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's here, and at least it's finally, like you said, it's getting a lot of attention now, which is great. It's what it should have always been.
Absolutely. And #1 on Hulu, which is fantastic within the first day. I mean, that gives it a national spotlight and everyone's talking about Ellen. And I'm sure that brings some comfort to Josh and Sandy. So
I'm
thank
sure and it also kind of, forces the hand of PPD to respond accordingly, I think. So,
and do the right thing. Not
yeah.
double down, do the right thing. There's no
Yeah.
cost to that whatsoever. So let's hope that that's what's going to happen. And anything else you want to add, Sarah, before we close? I know I've kept you for longer because you're hating talking with you. Now I found but a lot to talk about.
Yes, we do. We do have a lot to talk about. No, I think, I feel like we've covered a lot, and I just feel really fortunate to have gotten to be a part of the project and now getting to talk to you about it. Just your work in the space of domestic violence and coercive control is something I've followed for years, and so I was thrilled when you reached out. I really was.
Oh, thank you. Well, I was thrilled that you accepted to speak with me, and I know we're going to be talking again. And I'm just surprised, our paths haven't crossed, but I'm very grateful that they have now. So we will be definitely talking again. So thank you for your time and for your very important work.
Likewise. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. And to all of you lovely lot, be curious, ask questions, and always trust your instincts. Hey, lovely. And I just want to underline the importance of everybody understanding what the early warning signs of coercive control look like, and also what the high risk factors look like, and how women can become entrapped by men. It's very important that we have women like me, experts on male violence and coercive control to women, to explain those dynamics. And if you want more, you can join my masterclasses. I have got a number left between now and the end of the year. I've already run 3 classes, so you've missed those. And these are the fee-based ones. And there's the Dash Masterclass on October the 29th and 30th. That's the domestic abuse, stalking and harassment, and honor-based violence risk identification, assessment, and management model. It's a mouthful. That's why it's called the Dash Masterclass training, where I unravel coercive control and domestic abuse and the macro picture, the grooming patriarchy of how she got into the situation by a male perpetrator. She was primed before she even met him. And I unravel all of that, the high risk factors, the early warning signs, and the profile of the perpetrators and their psychopathology. I did some of the first work of looking at the offenders, looking at all the intelligence and everything we held at New Scotland Yard. And I wrote various reports about that. And it's in my book, Policing Domestic Violence. So I share that with you all in my Dash Masterclass training. I've got Dash Train the Trainer on November the 12th and 13th if you want to go on and be university accredited to train others in the tool. Stalking is on December the 4th. The victimology, how victims are targeted, the impact on them, the risk factors, and the profile of the stalkers. And coercive control is on December the 10th and 11th. These are very detailed classes. And importantly, it's 10 years since I changed the law on coercive control in England and Wales, that successful campaign. And I'll be saying more about that in December. And I'm still here changing laws in America, in Australia, because I think it is so important. These early warning shots that something could escalate to murder, I want that criminalized. I want offenders to know that's not okay, and for there to be accountability and responsibility taking. There has to be a consequence. And we've seen the femicide rate skyrocket. So I talk about all of that in my expert-led training. And if you want to join, you can click the link in the show notes, or you can email laurarichardspa@gmail.com. And these classes really are life-saving and life-changing, as well as all my videos. Do go back and watch the rest of the videos on Ellen and the Murdoch murders and all the other cases where I've been unraveling coercive control and psychopaths and their psychopathology, because I want to save and change lives. And I've heard from so many of you that the dash or my training or something that you heard me talk about coercive control, that it woke you up and made you realize that you were in a very dangerous situation. And some of you have told me that I not only changed your life, but I saved your life. And I can't tell you the feeling that I get, complete chills when I hear that. And it makes me walk 10 foot taller because it means it's worth me doing this, talking into the camera and sharing this information with you. It's exactly why I do what I do. So please keep sharing my content with other people. You never know what's really going on for someone behind closed doors. Please keep sharing your stories with me in your comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Okay, until next time, be curious, ask questions, and always trust your instincts.